After about 5 to 10 minutes, fine.
Yes, perfect.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, another SportsBox AI webinar. We've got an exciting agenda ahead of us. My name is Ji-Hei Lee, founder and CEO of SportsBox. Phil Cheatham, Dr. Phil Cheatham is always is also on, and he's our Chief Science Officer and lead educator of all things 3D. So he's here to present with Terry. And Terry Rowles, obviously you guys know who he is. That's why you're here. We are also joined by Dr. Jeff Broker and Dr. Mike Duffy, two of our biomechanics advisory board members. So this was such a big topic that it required 3 PhDs in biomechanics to bring all this great content to you guys. So I hope you guys are excited. This is a special treat that we get. We get these amazing minds and brains to join us today. I'm personally very excited about it. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Terry.
Thank you, great leader. And of course, to my distinguished guests and friends there with PhDs and things, much smarter than us. But, you know, it's a good team. We're all in that, you know, with a similar mindset as how do we make this better? You know, how do we improve golf? And, you know, it seems like in golf that many minds working together seems to get there in a much more effective way. So I'm going to start my presentation on the lower body. Let me see, screen, start broadcast. Let me know if I have any problems here.
By the way, if you guys are here, you already know this, but if you guys are joining us through a YouTube recording, this is the second part of a 3-part series on the 9 swing archetypes, the research that Terry and Mike did to really profile people's ideal swings based on their body types and the way they move their upper and lower bodies naturally. What's really exciting is that they began this research before there was SportsBox, but since SportsBox came about, they were able to add more color to their research and actually not just, you know, categorize people into moving this a certain way, but actually measure the parameters that are ideal for them using SportsBox, which, you know, makes things very, very practical for everyone from coaches to average golfers to actually, you know, act on the information that Terry and Mike have developed. So that's yeah. And part 2, last week we did part 1, which was around the upper body profiles and how to measure on SportsBox the kind of the ideal ranges. And today it'll be lower body. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll cover kind of how to pull it all together for the whole swing. So there you go.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Mike has probably given more lessons than almost any other human alive. He's dawn till dusk, you know, 6 to 7 days a week. And, you know, he has a tremendous photographic memory. So he remembers every lesson, he remembers what works. And, you know, like most people that are successful are extremely passionate about golf, helping people to get better at golf, you know, growing the game, things like this. So, you know, Mike's been looking at this for a long time. You know, he developed the assessments that we do. But what's really happened since I got involved with Mike and since we've been using SportsBox, especially, you know, ground force plates, launch monitors, is that the information in the buckets is filling up. I don't like to say, you know, we're giving somebody an ideal swing, but we're definitely making the target a lot smaller. So we know who you're not. Within the bucket of who you are, there's some variability. But basically, we worked out, you know, sway gap was a really big breakthrough in terms of working out the relationship between the upper body and lower body. And we literally are going to categorize our swing styles or archetypes by sway gap as a primary variable. So this week, talked a lot about that last week. This week, we're going to talk about lower body. And, you know, so just a small word again on what we teach and how we decide to teach.
Terry, just a quick one. Ji-Hei's window is covering up part of the screen.
Oh,
can you drag
not
it?
Anymore.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect.
Thank you. I learned it a lot quicker this week. So basically, how do we decide what to teach? There's lots of different ways to enter into making changes. You know, I would say most golf teachers start at the outcome and say, well, you know, the launch monster says this, or the video looks like this. Mike and I would say the biggest thing that distinguishes us in terms of the way that we think about teaching is we work out how you move first. What can you do? And so we assess what you can do, and then we build the swing around it with a tremendous body of experience and data that supports the characteristics that tend. Tend is an important word. We're not mechanically, you know, forcing you to do things, but there are certain characteristics that tend to happen when somebody moves like this. So we can see that's Bryson on the left, Ludwig on the right. The pivot point of the hip is very different. You know, Bryson's pelvis is more left, but not only that, his trail hip is deeper. You know, he's turned more, etc. So we can see those differences. So 9 swing profiles. You know, from left to right here, we got Hideki, Tiger, and Jordan Spieth. So 1, 2, 3, as we talked about last week, is going to be more of an on-top grip. 4, 5, 6 through the middle here, they're defined by their sway gap and by their upper body, you know, fold and arm style. But here we can clearly see that 4, 5, 6 is a very different lower body action. Jordan Spieth more loaded up into his trail leg, where Hideki is much more towards his lead leg, even though he tries to fight it. So we have something that Mike calls the post test. And probably the easiest way to think about this is like there's a gate. So the interesting thing is our pelvis is not a perfect circle. It's kind of more of an ellipse. And, you know, the hinges are the hips. Let me see here. So, can you guys see me? Or do I have to get rid of my screen share?
Oops. Yeah, we can see you now.
You can see me?
Yeah, I can see you now.
I'll just get rid of it for a second. Let me just explain. How do I do this? Okay. So let me stand up and explain what I'm going to do here. So the pelvis is an ellipse. And when we test people, we're basically, you know, we're going to ask them to put a club across the top of their thighs in their golf posture, and they're going to turn. There's basically one of 3 outcomes. We're either going to turn into their right hip, they're going to turn around their front hip, or it's going to be equal, you know, backwards and forwards of both hips. So if you look at it from here, if I turn around my trail hip, my lead hip is going to appear out in front. If I turn around my lead hip, my trail hip is going to go back. And if I'm in the middle, they're both going to go backwards and forwards. This is just really important to understand that some people do those things. And then there's a set of things that then will happen downstream of that, which we can measure. So I'm going to put my thing back up here. And see what we got. So again, we can see 3 different styles on those 3 pictures. Ludwig is more on the trail side. Get rid of the picture of Mike there. Tiger is more in the middle, and Bryson has moved to his left side very early. So there's 3 golfers who are different post styles. Tony Finau on the left side, Rory in the middle, Ludwig on the right. So we can see the sway number is in the bottom left, the sway number, and the point at which this picture was taken is the point at which they move, they sway their pelvis the maximum to the trail side. So believe it or not, Tony Finau has already moved to the maximum of his trail side movement with the pelvis. So very early in the backswing, that would include people like Bryson, Zach Johnson, Scotty Scheffler, some other players we'll see through the presentation. Rory is pretty much through the midpoint of his backswing, which is going to include people like Tiger, Adam Scott. It's probably the most popular style or common style. It's not popular. It is a movement pattern. It's not a swing style. We have to sort of understand that most people think there's an option of how you swing. And again, Mike and I are assessing people, and then we're saying, okay, you are this category of player, not because of the way that you choose to swing, but more of the way that you're categorized according to the test or the assessment. So Rory is more of the middle style. So when we look at those assessments, these are the sort of things that we're expecting to see that the players tend to do. And we can see with Ludwig here, very late in the backswing, he's got a little bit more movement to the trail side, and he is going to be, moving much later than Tony Finau, for example. So here's an example. Unfortunately, I didn't put the scale in the bottom. This is basically the P's in the golf swing. So if you go from the left to right, it's like P1, P2, P3, P4. So front post is blue, so that means they move a small amount away from the target, which means below the 0 line. They move back to 0 at about P3. They're positive at P4, and they stay ahead of the rest of the players all the way through the swing. So we would expect them to move the least to the trail side and the most to the lead side. The yellow one is the rear post. They move the most and the longest away from the target. They recenter late, so they are still right of where they started at the top of the backswing, and then they move less to the left or less to the lead side throughout the swing. So significantly different to the front post, maybe about 2 inches. The red one is the center, so somewhere in the middle. They're going to move to the trail side, recenter somewhere halfway in the backswing. They're going to be about 0 relative to where they started at the top of the backswing, and they're somewhere in between the rear and the center. Interestingly, because of the way I explained the way that the pelvis works like an ellipse, I feel like posting style will have an effect on the thrust numbers. For example, somebody who is a rear post golfer, they're thrusting a fraction towards the target at the top, but then more importantly, at impact, they're going to have more of a negative thrust because of they're going to be less towards the lead side and pivoting more around their trail leg, or pushing around their trail leg. And then someone like Brandon Steele's a front post, he's going to be thrusting a fraction more at impact because he's going to be turning more around his movement style, which is more around his lead hip. So there might be a fraction of depth difference. I got Mike Duffy here. I'm going to stop sharing, Mike. And there it is. So we've done some research with Mike about ground forces in regards to this. And there we go. So Mike is going to talk a little bit about that. So we did a presentation at the Top 100 conference a few years ago, and we've continued to refine it. And Mike doesn't do our assessment as much as he's looked at the ground forces from a force plate style, but equally has seen 3 different ground force profiles. So his naming and assessing is slightly different, but we agree that there are 3 different styles. Are you there, Mike?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Can't see you, can hear you.
We're working on that. Yes. I'm
That wasn't exactly what I expected to see.
cheating my way to the beach. All right. Hi, folks. Good to see all of you. It's a great group we have. I like talking to all of them. So I'll probably jump right in. And Terry knows me well. I love analogies and metaphors, especially long ones. But I'm going to try a new one today. And everyone here can tell me if it works or if it doesn't work. So my analogy is the golf swing is similar to a car, an automobile. There are 3 key functions or systems in a car. There's the engine, the transmission, and then the steering. All 3 are super important. You really don't have a car without them. So working through that and how they compare to the golf swing. In my view, so the engine of a vehicle is what creates the energy for the car to go, or really to go faster. It can go downhill without an energy, or sorry, without an engine. But really, the purpose of the engine is to add speed, and that's what ground forces are. They're the engine. They put the energy in. From there, the car example, it goes to the transmission, and that takes that raw energy and distributes it through the car through through the chassis, through the body, and eventually delivers that energy to the steering mechanism. So in the golf swing, I view especially the legs and how they create energy. That's going to be the ground forces are going to be the engine. Then that transfer of energy is going to work its way through the body, and finally, really the steering mechanism is sort of from the shoulders to the hands for the club. I don't mean to make this too specific. Movement of the lower body obviously helps steer the club, but it's a general idea to get sort of where does the energy come from, how is it transferred, and then really how is the final outcome, the golf swing itself, how is it controlled? So there are two things to keep in mind on this as we transfer to talking about the golf swing. One, and I'm sticking with driving a car. How you steer affects how you add power. I think probably everybody understands that it's great to hit the gas when you're going straight, but there are times like in a sharp curve that is not the time to add in a whole lot of energy to floor it. So how you particularly steer, how your body is moving and trying to deliver the club, just like in a car, that is going to influence how and when we want to add power into the swing. The other one that really is pretty similar to a car itself, and I think my best example I could come up with was rear wheel drive versus front wheel drive. The relationship between the body of the vehicle and the engine matters. If you've got really controlling and steering a rear wheel drive vehicle is quite different from a front wheel drive, and people have tried both of those. So there are things you can do really well with the rear wheel drive that's harder for a front wheel drive. So that's my analogy, and so we'll turn that into the golf swing. Terry went through some key kinematic differences, visual differences between some swings. And it's actually a really useful tool to assess in general how somebody's going to best add energy into a swing. So that body to the engine relationship. Like Terry said, we started doing this work quite a few years ago, and it became pretty quickly apparent that how a body moves, how a golfer moves, really influences the energy that goes in, how they can put it in, when it can go in, and realistically, the biggest determinant for that is either the center of mass or the center of the pelvis, how it's moving. So Terry, I think, is going to talk about some pelvis movement, but realistically, using his examples, people that shift away more, they're going to have somewhat different strategies. They should have somewhat different strategies in how they put energy in versus somebody like, I think it's Tony Finau that Terry was talking about, that has a tiny little shift away and then moves toward the target by the middle of backswing. To put it in general, there are three components really that people can use. Vertical force, lateral force, and by that I mean side to side, and then front to back. And this, how much sway and really where they are at top of backswing is really going to tell us what the ground force relationship should be. And in a short version, people that have more movement away from the target, they're going to take advantage of pushing sideways. It makes sense. They're moving sideways. They have to use that push at the right time and the right way, and that helps, just like pushing the gas pedal down, that helps put energy in. They are going to use vertical forces differently than somebody who, like Tony, that gets to the lead side first. Early. Tony's not going to use that lateral push nearly as much, but that's okay. He's going to use vertical forces, especially on his lead side, to create most of his power. And then Terry, I missed who your middle post pattern is, or center post. People that stay more centered, they're going to use more of a combination of these. And I think Terry's going to talk about timing as well. The timing of how much and when they apply their side to side forces and when they apply lead side vertical forces, they're going to be different across all three. So to circle back, ground forces put in energy. Certainly that has to get through the body. And I'm a huge fan of using force plates. Not many people have those. But a great parallel to use to understand how people should be pushing is to use how much sway, and you can use the pelvis as a really nice indicator of that. And that helps instructors see, all right, people with a lot of movement away that are still there at top of backswing, still away from the target, they should be feeling a lot more sideways push and have a later vertical up and down push. Somebody like Tony is going to use almost no lateral push. So the key there is to encourage that person to use a much earlier vertical force or vertical up and down push on the lead side. So that's sort of the basic introduction to the three patterns. Terry talks about front post, center post, and lead post. I'm sorry, rear post. When I look at ground forces, I talk about front load, center load, and trail load or rear load. And those load patterns should match up with the movement pattern that Terry's talking about. What else?
Thank you very much, sir.
All right.
See you soon. Okay, so let me continue. So as Mike was saying, he's looked at the different profiles on a force plate. We're looking at it here in Sportsbox. So I think one of the key principles that Mike educated us on was the importance to create space to use the force that you need to use. And so, for example, somebody as a rear post needs to move to the trail side. So people who are rear posts tend to move to the trail side more than average, and quite often get taught out of it. And so when we assess them, we often have to encourage them to move to the trail side. I'll give you some numbers. Center post is going to have more turn and be lowering through transition more to create the space for their hybrid engine, which is rotation and vertical. And the front post is going to lower in order to use their vertical force, but it's a little less explosive lowering than Rory here on the right, because they're going to be getting onto their left side very early and pushing for a longer period of time. So here's some rear post golfers. So we have Stacey Lewis, Lydia Ko, and Minwoo Lee at the point in their swing when they've moved the most to the trail side. So they're creating space for that lateral push off of the trail leg. We can see them here at impact. Again, they're going to have a relatively low pelvis sway number, as my graph suggested. So we can see that number is pretty low, 3, 3, and even Minwoo Lee is back of where he started. He's a profile 9, so there's maybe a reason for that. These are center post golfers. This is Tiger, pretty elite group here, Tiger, Rose Zhang, and Rory. At the point in their swing when they've moved their pelvis, they swayed the pelvis maximum to the trail side. So in terms of timing, this is very important to understand for all of these. Impact going to give me a little bit of a higher number, 4 to 6-ish. We can see there. Front post golfers, these are all at the point in their swing where they've moved the most to the trail side. So we got Bryson, Scotty Scheffler, and Tony Finau. And so part of our book is going to have a section within the profiles, which is called Magic and Tragic. So these guys being told to move, and they're not short hitters, being told to move to their trail side for more power is not relevant. If you told that to this other group, these guys, we'd probably be looking at an opportunity to develop more power because they can load into their trail leg better and push harder. We can see here, the front post golfers have gotten to the lead side early, and it's a higher number at impact that they tend to have at impact. So there's 3 sort of different paths that you can take. It's very predictable path. When we do the assessment, we can sort of see that window of opportunity. So as Mike said, there's three forces that we're looking at, and therefore there's sort of three spaces that we're trying to fill. This is Lydia with her pelvis lift. So generally, you'll see the lowest point in the pelvis be pretty consistent. It's just after the top of the backswing. But the degree to which they go down is different. So we can see Minwoo and Lydia. So Lydia pretty much stays the same, doesn't go down. Minwoo Lee goes down 1/2 inch to his peak lowering, and then raises up about 2 inches. So that's a pretty low number for the type of club head speed that he's creating versus what people expect. We can see that Lydia's pelvis lift has only lifted, actually it's lifted quite a lot, 2.8, 1.8. So,
but Terry,
yep.
Are you deliberately comparing irons to drivers? Because I mean, you're gonna have different lifts for
the movement of a person. It's not the club.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do whatever, but honestly, these are showing different styles more than they're showing different clubs. You're not going to be seeing too much difference. I mean, there is a power difference, but yeah, these are more movement styles. So we can see with Rose on the left and Rory on the right, they're both lowering to the top of the backswing through transition. Rory's historically the lowest right here, and then pushing up to about level because they tend to drop more. They don't come up quite as much as a net through impact. This is Scotty Scheffler, the driver. And I think that is Georgia Hall. So front post golfers. Maximum lowering, so not a ton of lowering through transition because they're already on their lead foot. They're already pushing really hard. And they push up through transition to a positive number. Rear post golfers, about 40 degrees of turn. So we're going to talk about rotation. Interestingly, because of the hybrid style of the center post golfer, they'll tend to have about the same amount of turn impact and at the top, roughly, and that's what it shows in our database. There's obviously going to be individual variances, but here we've got about 40 degrees, 43 Minwoo. Rory is really big backswing turn. I think that's Rose, big backswing turn. So as a center post golfer, the key differences from either side, it's almost like a bell curve, is that they are turning more and lowering more in order to push back to kind of a level through impact. So about 30 degrees, both of these on the other side. This is some front post golfers, a little bit less turn in the backswing. They've already moved to their front foot and a little bit less turn at impact. So the center post golfer is definitely going to be more dynamic in terms of more rotation on both sides and more lowering. And that's about it. So basically, there we go. I thought I had one more. Sorry about that. Anyway, give me a second. Where are we? So to summarize, we have 3 styles for the lower body. So basically, we're going to put together 9 styles for the swing, which is going to represent 3 upper body movement styles that we talked about last week, which is very much represented by a spectrum of sway gaps. 3 lower body styles. The 3 lower body styles produce different ground reaction forces, different combination of forces. The rear post golfer is going to be moving more to the trail side, pivoting more around their trail hip in the assessment. They're going to be pushing off their trail leg through transition. They have a little less turn and a little less lowering and lifting than a center post golfer. Center post golfer is going to be in the assessment. They're going to be pivoting around both hips. As a consequence, in their golf swing, they're going to turn more in the backswing, a little bit more impact. And they're also going to be lowering through transition the most, coming back to a number closer to 0. And then the front post golfer, very small amount of movement to the trail side. They're going to get onto their lead side early, so it's almost like a yoga pose, which I'm sweating just thinking about it. You get into your lead leg and you're pushing for a really long period of time. It's not quite as dynamic in terms of the up and down motion as a center post golfer, but they're pushing on their lead leg for a long time. So there's different styles, different strokes for different folks. Importantly, coming back to the sway impact, the rear post golfer is going to move the least towards the target. The front post golfer is going to move the most towards the target. And so that combination of kinematics creates a different set of kinetics. And for us, the way we look at it is we make sure that the human is moving according to the way that they're assessed to be moving. And that, for us, gives us the opportunity to put the most energy into the golf swing. We create the potential for the action to create the reaction force that we're looking for. And, as Mike said, we're looking to have them push hard off their trail leg. Are we looking for them to be pushing on their lead leg for a long time? Or are we looking for a rotation, drop, and lift for those different styles? And we can see, within the numbers of SportsBox, we can see that.
Okay, well, we've got some questions. First, we've got a request to see the slide, what the post explanations of movement before you went into the pictures of different players. He's asking if we can just put that slide up.
I did that myself, I think. Didn't I demonstrate that? So basically, if you look at your two hips and your pelvis as an ellipse, people who are rear post, they're going to be turned, their left hip will move out and they'll appear to move to their trail side, but they'll be moving around their trail hip. The center post golfer, the trail hip goes back and the lead hip goes forward almost equally. If you look at somebody, and if they're a front post golfer, their trail hip goes behind the lead hip. So their hinging, their post is going to be more stable and they're going to be moving around it. And that's why, if you look at the front post, so this is my lead leg, this is my pelvis, it opens like a gate inwards when we're doing the assessment. The gate's kind of just equal in center post. If I'm a trail leg golfer, in the assessment, my pelvis is going to be moving towards the target line, let's say, but pivoting around the trail leg. So that's how we view the assessment. And the consequence of that is, the pelvis sway numbers and obviously the look of the swing, but this pelvis sway number is the biggest difference.
So Terry, I think perhaps the graph too that you were showing with the different color bars, I really like that. So can you go over that again?
I can do that.
And tell
While
us,
you do that, there's a question around, is an over-the-top swing caused by using forces in the correct sequence or open club face?
Well, that's a good one. Phil and I have talked about this many hours. Caused by is always an interesting one. That's like a never-ending loop of what we think it is. I mean, I would say the first question to that question is, what is over the top? So are we talking about hand path depth or shaft steepening? So there's a various sort of differences. The way I look at it is there's a hand path and the head path. I would say if I could just make it up as I go along, I would say a lack of rotation in the backswing would be a big one. The pelvis sway, moving too long to the trail side. So sway gap is a big story to tell around over the top. So for example, the sway gap is the relationship between my upper body and lower body. So over the top insinuates that somebody is probably swinging to the left too much. So if I move my pelvis to the trail side beyond my personal assessed timing. So for example, if I'm a front post golfer and I'm still moving my pelvis to the trail side at the top of the backswing, then I have an incorrect sway gap. My upper body gets ahead of my lower body. That for me would be a really big one in higher handicap golfers. So I would say there's actually another slide which I hit at the end, which is a good one. If you look at the transition timing, so that's a window, right? So when do we start our downswing? So for example, a front post golfer technically starts their downswing extremely early, if we can remember the picture of like Scheffler and Finau. So their pelvis actually starts moving towards the target extremely early in backswing, but their club still has to get to the top, and they still have to turn 90 something degrees and all that sort of thing. So a lot of people haven't learned that as a skill. That's a movement skill, to be able to move their lower body but continue to turn. If we think about throwing, for example, I step into my lead side, but I still complete my arm turn and my chest turn before I then start my downswing. A lot of people are very tight in the golf swing. I would say it sort of goes back to our steepeners and shallowers webinar, where what things cause people to be steeper. Stiffness is a big one, like a lack of disassociation between segments. So, if somebody's a front post golfer, they move to the left, but their spine is tight, their hands are tight, they've got bad grip, all these things anything that causes stiffness or bad sequencing or lack of disassociation in body, then that's going to be steepness to me. So it's a pretty big answer, because just the term over the top is relatively non-specific, sadly. So I'm assuming maybe the hands are coming out or the shaft is steepening, but those would be the most common, I would say. Incorrect sway timing for the style. If they have good sway timing, are they able to continue to finish their backswing as they're moving the lower body front side? I mean, that's the movement skill that is very well represented in the spectrum of 30 handicap down to 0. As that handicap goes down, people get better at disassociating. We're going to talk about that a little bit next time with sequencing. So lack of disassociation, bad sway gap, bad pelvis timing. It's a big one. Sorry.
Okay. Does the ability to separate the chest and pelvis influence pivot? As in less separation needed for front post golfers?
Ooh, that's a good one. So I'm assuming like an X factor kind of thing, just rotation. Well, if I take the transition sequence as I just explained it, that there's a moment in time when the pelvis is moving towards a target, but say, for example, the trail shoulder is still moving behind the head, or that window is a lot longer for a front post golfer than a rear. Some people, I would say, potentially find rear easier, because it's almost like their body, finishes moving to the trail side at the same time that they're able to then, move their arms and hands down and forward. So I would say that might be true. There's definitely probably more disassociation required for the front post.
Okay. Craig
But
Jacobs
that's a very
asked,
general question, a very general answer, sorry.
will ball position change slightly from front post versus center rear? Since Phil's talked about the wrists being huge components of power, how do the hinges for the archetypes match up? As in, what hinge style matches the archetype for under front post?
Well, let's just call it profiles. Profile 1 to 3 on top golfers. They because their elbows work more in, so the swing arcs more in earlier for the hand path for on top golfer. So 1, 2, 3 will have the ball further back, whereas the under golfer, their hand path is less in, and so therefore their ball position is slightly more forward.
How about the wrist hinge at the top?
Well, we talked about that last time. Wrist hinge at the top. Well, Phil, there's different wrist hinges.
Right.
Basically, if you look at the lead wrist, so on top golfer is going to have, on average, a weaker lead hand grip, and so as a consequence, they're going to have a slightly flatter left wrist at the top. On top golfer is going to have a more extended wrist at address, because they have a stronger left hand, and so consequently, it's going to be more extended at the top. The rotation is different, but forearm rotation is kind of tricky to measure, because it's not an absolute number; it's relative. So the under golfer is going to have more lead arm rotation going back, more trail arm rotation going through, because of the nature in which the arms work. we're on a low body seminar here, so maybe we talk about the knees or something.
Hey, can I hop in just for a second on that? So I think it's going to match up pretty well with the kinematic side. There are two things or one thing I'll preface this. So there's what you should be doing and what you do, and we'll see plenty of people with a mismatch in ball position. So there's always that part. If part of this question was does once we've matched up the load pattern with the movement pattern, what I've seen in successful front load players is they struggle with they for the most part they can't really play the ball very far back in the stance. It is so anybody can play it forward. Front load folks have more difficulty with keeping the ball back, but that makes sense that the body is more toward the target. So I think it's a broad statement to say any of the three load patterns can successfully play with a sort of traditional, somewhat forward ball position. It's going to be harder for a front load front post to play with a ball position closer to the middle or even occasionally past middle of stance for the trail foot.
Terry, yeah, as a single variable, but the upper body
yes.
movements are significantly more important because spin loft is a big thing. So on top golfers will tend to have a steeper attack angle and more loft, whereas under golfers will tend to, because of the way the arm is delivering from behind the hip, so it's causing the club to come out and be steeper with more loft. So where under golfers, the elbow is much more in front of the body. So it's basically releasing in a different way. So the under golfer will have a shallower angle of attack and less loft. We saw that in the research we did with Phil. When we were doing the different grip styles, when we got people to grip stronger, they tended to swing to the right, be shallower, and have less loft. So, if you look at Ping's attack angle driver fitting chart, you can basically superimpose grips over that and say the people that have the strongest grips will be more towards the hitting out lower spin. It's also effect on contact point. But for us, the arm folding style, the last week's seminar has a much bigger effect on ball position than lower body, but it definitely is a combination. If you look at it purely, two-dimensionally, it would make sense that somebody is more forward, and therefore their ball is dynamically further back, but at the same time they line the shaft up earlier, and they also have more lift. So it sort of nets out a little bit of a steeper angle of attack, but it sort of matches up the fact that they have more spin loft, and that's going to be a lower launching, higher spinning type of golfer. And that's why Bryson, for example, went to a very low lofted driver, which I thought was a really smart solution, because not everyone understands obviously these matchups, but he'd sort of trial and error his way into it.
Okay, a few more questions. Would you consider there to be a tracker truth relationship about pelvis turn and the post type at impact, like rear post turning less, center post most open at impact, and front post is least of all?
My friend Phil here is in charge of the naming of tracker truths. I have a decent database, and I would say it was a surprising finding to say that both rear and front turn slightly less than center. But if we understand the dynamics of the center being a lowering and lifting with some push, I mean, they have the benefit of almost every style, but not if they're not built for it. So I would say it's to be determined. Generally speaking, the backswing is more of an indication with the center post having slightly more rotation back. The rotation through is related to many things, to be honest. I wouldn't want to be predictive, but in assessing it, I would say, Phil and I can go through this, but we'll put a potential track of truth in there. But you've already looked at the database, Phil, right?
Yeah, not on that one though. I think to be determined. We can go look at that one.
I think it's very complicated. It's more than one. There's quite a lot of layers that contribute to pelvis rotation impact. More. It's not single variable.
Yeah, and before we finish though, I'd really like you to go over that graph again if you've got it handy.
Oh,
I
yeah.
know we have a few more questions, but that was pretty impressive graph.
Well, there it is. Can you see it?
Yeah, perfect. Can you go through and explain that again?
Yeah. So the left side is inches, and the bottom is swing positions. So obviously everybody starts at 0 on Sportsbox. So when the club first moves, we're all 0. So on the left side, we're at 0.
So we're the blue, red, and yellow are the front, center, and rear.
Rear, correct. So early in the backswing or in the backswing, the rear is moving away from the target for more and longer. The front is moving away for the least and for the shortest period of time. Center is in the middle. Top of the backswing, if you go, the first collection of graphs is, P2, club parallel to the ground. And then top of the backswing, halfway back, left arm parallel to the ground is the red and yellow. And then at the top where you can just see the blue and yellow, that's top of the backswing. So if you follow the front post to the top, they go small movement away about 1.5 inches early. And then by the time they get to the top of the backswing, they might be 1.5 inches towards the target as the club changes direction. The rear post continues to move to the trail side almost until the top of the backswing. We can see here they've moved over 2 inches at P3. P4, they've returned to probably 1 inch away from, which makes sense to me. So a very good rule of thumb is if you're a front post golfer, you probably want to have your pelvis 1 inch towards the target when the club changes direction. If you're a rear post, 1 inch away from the target, and center post wants to be close to 0.
But interesting. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, interesting. One of the track of truths we did find though was, regardless of front, rear, or center post, they were always moving towards the target by the top of the backswing.
Absolutely. So that's represented here, right, in terms of the trajectory that each of the movements takes. It's just more about, I think it's very interesting, generally we've always, with force plates, you talk a lot about, the forces, impact or delivering, in the downswing. But this is much more, sort of the creating space and understanding where do we have to go to create that? What action do we have to do to create that reaction? Which I know you'll agree with, Phil, because we're talking kinetics and kinematics. And so, we're creating the opportunity for someone to use the force, and you can see that pretty clearly in this graph. And then from the downswing standpoint, the trajectory of the front post golfer is to be further towards the lee side for the whole downswing, and the rear never catches up. And so, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I like that graph.
Harry, while you have it up, Phil just mentioned this. I think it's even earlier, but certainly by top of backswing. But what's the latest you see in a good swing, pelvis starting to move toward the target?
I would say if you say P3 is, club vertical or left arm parallel to the ground, whichever, and then the top is when the club changes direction, it'll be somewhere in between. It will be pretty late, I would say, in terms of movement. So not exactly the top, just before the top, but I would say the respectful way to teach and treat people humanely is to understand that there's kind of windows of time and not just like a specific point, but somewhere after, left arm parallel to the top of the backswing is a good window for a rear post to be starting to move towards the target. I would say, just in terms of pelvis sway on sportsbox, I haven't seen somebody who's good, let's say, still moving towards the trail side at change of direction. It's always fractionally prior to the top of the backswing.
Thanks.
Okay. Drew wanted to know, you mentioned Min Lee was number 9. How do you describe 1 to 9 types? Example, front post on Top Golfer is
We're going to cover this a little bit more next time. So the grip is, their folding style, whether their arms are coming in or rotating in front of them, is determining. So 1, 2, 3 is more of a person that tends to, their elbows fold in and their arms move across their chest more. Somebody who's an under golfer, their arms are going to, or their forearms are going to be rotating, but the elbows are going to stay more in front of their body. So that would be 7, 8, and 9. And so then 4, 5, 6 is a hybrid. And then with the posts, so one is, 1, 4, 7, they're all front post golfers, but the difference is the trail arm fold style. So number 9 means that he would be an under golfer. So his elbow stays, very much in front of him. It doesn't go behind his shirt seam. And he's a rear post golfer. So that would be someone like a Davis Love, Luke Donald, Lydia Ko. That would be a female version of that. So combination of their arm fold style and their low body assessment. So it's very much describing their movement characteristics and not their current golf swing. This is a very important thing that people talk about what we do, and we're measuring people's movement. What can they do? What do they do first, and then building the golf swing, to what they can do easily and effectively. And that's not to say that every single pro in the world has worked on trying to oppose the nature, or they've tried to make their swing look more like somebody else. I mean, there's all sorts of sort of nature and nurture matchups on all tours, and so there's a difference between how someone swings sometimes and what we assess, but it's generally the case that the people that are winning are really usually pretty well matched up to their style.
Okay, next question. Does movement off the butt line through impact differ for the 3 pivots?
Yeah, I think so. I said that briefly at the end with, if you understand a front post golfer, so, Scotty Scheffler would be somebody who, has an unbelievably strong push, right? So he loads onto the front of his left foot and then really springs back. So people look at it like a Scotty Scheffler shuffle. But he's unbelievably strong and physically strong in his lower body, in my opinion. So if you look at it as somebody who is, pivoting naturally around their lead hit, then I would say probably they're going to have less away from the target thrust. I mean, there's a higher potential that they're going to have thrust towards the target line, thrust towards the target line, versus somebody who's a rear post, and I actually had a slide there to show it. They're moving more to the trail side, so they'll actually have a slightly towards the target line in the backswing because of the shape of the pelvis, and then actually slightly away from the target line in the downswing, for a combination of reasons. Number one, the pivoting style, their assessment style is more around the trail leg. And again, the pelvis is not a circle, it's an ellipse. So yeah, so I would say it's probably a very small correlation. Not, again, it's one of those ones that's pretty complicated. It's easy to see in good players, and somebody who doesn't have a lot of movement skill, and maybe they're using their knees instead of a good grip to control the club face. Mike calls it the kneesels. It starts to become really complicated, which is, that's how we try and get people better. Make sure the right part of the body does the right thing.
Okay, a few more. I think we've got maybe 2 more questions. If a front post golfer has little to no pelvis or chest sway away from the target, are they more likely to come over the top? If they are encouraged to get sway away from the target, shouldn't that give them a better chance to shallow from the inside?
Yeah, I think it's very unusual that somebody has zero movement away, to be honest. You know, Mike Duffy is very perceptive in terms of, you know, how people's pelvis lines up at address. Like some people have their pelvis more to the trail side. So if you're going to see somebody who's on a zero sway away from, the odds are that their pelvis is already to the trail side at address. You know, they might have some weird trigger move, for example, but by the time the club starts moving, they're already on the trail side. So you might want to use the video option within Sportsbox to see if that's true. But yes, I agree. I definitely want to see some action reaction. I would like to see some movement off the ball in order to, you know, fuel the downswing, even if it is only for a short period of time.
Okay, last one. Ooh, which one? Are you correlating the matrix? Are you able to correlate the matrix of swing archetypes to any shot shape bias or path bias?
Yeah, I think the again, it's a multi-level thing. We've got somebody like Bryson, who's a front post, who is, you know, stands very far from the ball. He has his hands very high, has a weak left-hand grip. These are more like draw characteristics. So it's almost like you're putting all the variables into a bucket and then seeing what the net effect is. So Bryson as a net chooses and builds a swing that causes draws. He's unusual, I would say. I would say that generally speaking, as a normally flexible person, if you're, you know, front post or, yeah, someone like Scotty Scheffler, for example, then it would make sense to me, you know, because of the sway gap and its effect on the swing direction and how that relates to the arm folding style and the grips and the distance of the ball. There's a whole bunch of things that contribute to shot shape, but I would say, you know, generally speaking, 1, 2, 3 would tend to be faders, 7, 8, 9 would tend to be drawers, and 4, 5, 6 would tend to hit it pretty straight. But there are shot choices. There's, you know, nature and nurture in their swing. You know, Colin Morikawa is probably a profile 8, very low hands, very close to the ball, hits cuts as an under golfer. You know, Dustin Johnson would be at 8, hits cuts. You know, so there's, you know, but he uses his stance. He still swings to the right of his aim, but uses his stance to hit cuts. So there's lots of different variables come into it. But generally speaking, 1, 2, 3, slight fade, 7, 8, 9, shallower attack angle, slight draw, and 4, 5, 6 pretty straight, more level, mid spin.
All right, cool. Well, let's finish it up. Oh, you're back, GA.
Yeah, my internet's not great right now, but thanks everybody, and thank you all. Thank you, Terry, Mike, Jeff, and Phil for the great webinar. And as always, we'll get this posted on YouTube so everybody can rewatch and learn. So, and then we'll look forward to the last of the webinar series in a couple of weeks. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.